Welcome once again to our freight conversation, where the last conversation is linked to this one, and this one is linked to the following one. And joining us today, we have none other than managing partner of OTR Advisors and old friend, Kevin Hill. How are you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing great, Bill. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and this is going to be a fun session, I can already tell.
This is going to be a fun session. So we had a question posed, a very interesting one, and here it is. So 1,000 trucks, going from none to quite an aggressive and high number here, Kevin. This is a very interesting subject, and I'll just lay it out for you. You heard the question. What's your answer?
It's a very interesting question. I mean, it is 1,000 truck fleet is a beast, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It's a long-term play over a decade or so. But really, it's all about scalability, right? Everything that you do, every decision that you make has to be focused on that long-term goal, which is 10 years down the line. And when you start out, you're going to be nowhere near that 1,000 trucks. So a lot of those decisions you have to make in the short term, but you always have to have that long-term vision, and it's all about scalability.
So with that, obviously you start very small. One of the reasons I thought that you might be a good person to answer this question is obviously once you start, getting one truck fairly easy to do, but then past that, this is just basically making deals, right? It's just selling to try and keep your truck on the road.
It is. It's all about sales, and part of sales and part of building a business or book a business, if you're just a salesperson, is all about your niche. And I talk about it quite a bit on Put That Coffee Down, is creating your niche. So you have to identify what your strengths are, where do you think you're going to get, because you're talking about starting at one truck. Let's get to 50 first. You got to get to 50 and then 100 and then 200. And you might have a little bit of a different pivot or niche as you scale up, but you have to have an identity. What do you do really well? Is it going to be dry van? Is it going to be reefer? Is it going to be regional? Is it going to be flatbed? Is it going to be hazmat? Whatever that is to get you that first 50 or that first 100 or for the first tiered step in your goal, you have to fully commit to it, because you cannot be all things to all people. And if you look around at the 1,000 truck fleets out there, and I started my career in trucking at 1,000 truck fleet shop, they are very focused on what they do. They're not trying to be all things to all people. They don't have 8 different trailer types out there. They don't have 50 different categories of customers all wanting the different service levels. They are very focused and sales driven to fulfill their network capacity. So that is something that I see in businesses all around. You lose your focus. You try to get the short-term wins, and you start booking unprofitable business. You're never going to make it to 1,000 trucks that way.
Yeah, that's definitely tough to do. With that question, I had to ask a number of other people around the idea, how do you do this? And frequently I got the answer of, well, if I knew how to do it, I wouldn't tell you. Because obviously this is a situation where if someone did know how to do it and hasn't done it yet, but was on the way to do it, obviously nobody wants to give up any secrets. So maybe we're not hoping to expound on what some people might think is an inside track to getting, enormously rich if you're running 1,000 trucks at once here. But are there any, other than sticking to a very simple and targeted game plan, any ideas that you've heard of, that you've talked about with other people that say, all right, here's how we could do this? Yeah,
when we say we don't want to give away any secrets, or they don't want to give out any secrets, it's not really a secret of how you do it. It's all about the execution, right? As they say, ideas are a dime a dozen. It's all in the execution. So it's the same playbook for everybody, right? That they might have their own particular niche that they're really good at, right? But you get beyond that, and it comes down to process and efficiencies, right? From the get-go, you have to be process oriented, very efficient, because those early processes are going to be built upon to scale up the business as you get into 200 trucks, 500 trucks, 1,000 trucks. And a lot of that these days, and this is where it's a little bit easier, right? This is one of the upsides to it, is the technology is there to automate a lot of items that not only, you know, increase your head count, but also your error rate and your inefficiencies, right? Invoicing, trailer maintenance or tractor maintenance, just maintenance in general. All of these things can be automated and predicted. There's great tools, and you don't have to build it. It's not going to cost you a fortune. And it's something you can institute in the beginning years to have that culture of efficiencies, right? Because a lot of times, a lot of entrepreneurs, it's all about top line growth, and profitability will come, which has a lot of advantages to it, right? That because you do have to grow yourself out of certain situations, but having that from day one, that those tools and technology to really become efficient and build off that culture is important, and it's something that anyone can pick off the shelves now. Annual license, monthly license. You don't have to go out and build an entire development team. It's there for you to run your business and to lean on technology, to automate the processes, to become as efficient as possible and keep that efficiency, keep that in mind. Will get you to 1,000 trucks.
Let me jump into something you said there, which I thought was rather interesting too. Is obviously because the goal is, and at least in this example, is to get to 1,000 trucks. Along the way, of course, you're going to have to deal with the growth and of the technology that you're going to have to use in order to get there. So that being said, obviously anybody can make the jump from, let's say, 50 trucks to 51 trucks or 100 trucks to 101 trucks, and take that truck on and make that purchase real. But in terms of the technology, how do you know when to do this? How do you know when to go ahead and buy whatever it is that you think might get you to an ability where that efficiency is better managed over the course of this route of trying to get to the ultimate goal?
Well, the simple answer is when it makes sense, right? And it's going to make sense said to different people at different times, because the technology that you use, getting to 50 trucks, you're going to need new technology, or not really new technology, new capabilities is what we're really talking about. You need new capabilities at 100 trucks or 150 trucks, because your head count's going to grow. There's going to be new people in your organization, which I'll get to this in just a second, driver recruitment, but hiring as well. Hiring the right people is key to getting to 1,000 trucks, because you just can't do it alone. You can run 5 trucks maybe alone, maybe 10, maybe 15, but man, you have to get an entire team of people, not only at the management level, but at the employee level as well. And they have to be integrated into these processes, these efficiencies, this culture of, a lot of times safety, right? Safety plays an integral role in that as well from the beginning. So when do you need to step up? When it's time to step up. And that time is going to change for each individual business. So, but there's some milestones there to be looking out for. 50 trucks, 100 trucks, 200 trucks. It's going to be a continuous evolution of upgrading your tech. But those solutions are out there. They're easier to do than ever. A lot of times, vendors will implement everything for you as you grow. So take advantage of all the VC money coming into the industry these days, and really hop on that train.
Yeah. Going into kind of what you just said there in terms of obviously going into recruiting as well. Before we get into that ball of wax there, just to talk about, say, for instance, if you're the CEO and you're decided you're going to make this, you're going to do this, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the dilemma of a head football coach in the NFL in terms of, say, for instance, if they're an offensive specialist, do they even bother in hiring an offensive coordinator, because they're going to call the plays anyway, or because they have that kind of thing? For instance, if you're a person who's good in sales, you're probably not going to hire a sales manager. Or, as you get going, how do you use your own expertise? Because sometimes we can outfox ourselves into thinking that we can do our specialty on a much larger scale than we actually can in some respects sometimes.
You can, and not to really the sports analogies, but I'm a Cowboys fan, and Jerry Jones has kind of ruined the whole thing, right? Sometimes you have to get out of the way. Sometimes you are not the best offensive coordinator. You're not the best GM. You're the owner. So go be the owner.
I don't think he's calling plays yet.
Not yet.
But he might be close.
He probably calls 2 or 3 a game, I'm sure. He calls down to call 2 or 3. But he's a GM, right? And sometimes it's better to hire a GM, right? You could be a great salesperson, but you need a sales manager to handle it day to day, because you need to handle the business day to day. You need to be working on the business, not individual clients on that, right? Or the responsibilities. You have to free up your time. And I think that is one of the differences too, is that a 1,000 truck fleet is not dependent on who's sitting in the CEO role. So to be judged on a great business that you can sell, because if you have 1,000 trucks, it's got to be a sellable business, right? To be judged on that, anyone needs to be able to run the company, not just yourself. You have to be able to exit that. And Warren Buffett, is famous for saying he buys businesses that any fool can run. And you have to build a business that any fool can run to untap the real value of that. So you have to get out of the way and at a certain point, and you have to hire the right people and have the right people around you to be able to do that. So you can go play golf while you have 1,000 trucks on the road.
Or at least that's the goal anyway. You hope you don't have to worry about them too much there at that point. Hopefully you're not worried about each one individually.
Yes.
There as well. All right. So let's jump into the recruiting. And first off, let's start with the drivers themselves in terms of how you want to recruit. And then also maybe touch on what you are looking for in those upper management, eventually C-suite type places where you want the right, obviously you want the right people to be that can help you run the business in their own specialties. Yeah.
You want to be able to find talent and develop that into long-term positions, right? And exactly how you do that is different for everybody. But you have to find people that you trust, of course, right? That you trust to run the roles, that are capable of doing that, and might have a little bit of stake in the company as well to incentivize them. So you have to find the right management, comp, incentive packages to be able to do that. So it's something that's going to be a little bit different for everybody, but it's something that should be in the top of your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about drivers in terms of how you get the people that you want in the cabs. Obviously, at the very beginning, you're not needing them very often, but knowing that trucking can sometimes be, a heavy turnover industry, you got to recruit and retain. So any ideas for strategies there?
Yeah, recruit and train. Again, it goes back to getting great people around you, getting a great recruiting department, great process and procedures from the get-go. I think a lot of this is from the first truck, having this in mind and having an idea how to execute this to where you might be 5-10 years down the road. In trucking, you have turnover rates from 150% a year to 80% a year. But one of the things that you have to be focused on is keeping turnover as low as possible. So coming out with ideas to do that. Sometimes that's your fleet decisions, right? How new is your fleet? When are you turning over? What are the fringe benefits that you're going to offer? How are you going to compete against all the other trucking companies out there? And that goes into your niche as well. Are you going to be a regional carrier that you get the drivers home quite often? If you're over the road, how are you going to come up with a benefits package and the like to get that? And that goes into recruiting and retention and a safety focus, right? You have to have a safety focus to be able to do all that really well. So that's something that is uber important, right? I mean, one of the most expensive things of running a fleet, one of the biggest internal departments besides the drivers are usually the recruiting departments, because as we know, turnover is just high in trucking, 100%, sometimes over 100%. If you don't run that right, you're never going to have enough drivers in the pool to be able to add additional trucks to your fleet.
let me go back to the point that you were talking about retention just a little bit, because have you noticed anything in terms of philosophies within trucking companies? We don't have to name any specifically, but any sort of ideas where somebody might say, "Hey, it's a great company to work for," or they stick around there longer than most because there's a family atmosphere, or there's some sort of a philosophy that connects the drivers to middle management to upper management, and it's just a good company to work for.
Yeah, I think culture. I think the culture of the company, and I think if you build that culture from day one, and you keep that, and you make that a driven point of all your corporate strategy, I think that helps tremendously. And the second part is it goes back to sales, having great customers, having a great network, a really entrenched niche where you're really good at something. People like to be part of. A company or an organization that does well in their field, right? So if you pick out your niche, if you're really good at it, you have good customers that certainly pay on time, that get you in and out of the doors, that put you on regular lanes, some kind of consistency throughout the weeks and months for a driver, I think is very important, right? You want to kind of mimic how a private fleet operates in a lot of ways, because private fleet turnover rate is dramatically lower. The last thing I saw was from 2019. I think it was around 25 to 30% of private fleet drivers turnover each year, right? Compared to 100% of over the road or commercial carriers, which is a dramatic difference. Right. So I would take out and see what private fleets do really well and try to mimic that as much as possible.
So with that, this kind of goes right into that in terms of mimicking other people. And I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway. So if you start out, obviously, or maybe not obviously, you are looking strictly spot rate, and you're trying to get the truck out. You're trying to make some deals quickly. How quickly do you want to get into contract rate? And obviously, we're talking in May 2023. You want to get into contract rate as quickly as possible sometimes, or you might look at that way, just where they can go from here. But what's your attitude as you try to go from spot to contract to get that sustainability so that you can continue to go?
I think as quickly as possible, because you're not going to grow your fleet to any level that, if your goal is 1,000, any level that's going to be acceptable to you playing the spot market, because it's just infinitely complex. To be always be guessing that the spot market, it's like the stock market. It's like day trading, right? To always be guessing right, you're going to have huge losses at a certain point. Going back to a year ago, right? Starting in February, March of 2022, no one guessed that the spot market would tank, and we'd be sitting here a little bit over a year later in the doldrums. So you can't predict the market. No one can predict, whether it's stock market or the trucking market, the freight market, you can't predict it. So you want steady income where you can hedge in a lot of ways. And you want long-term customer contracts and long-term customer relationships, because that's the only way you're going to get to 1,000. You're not going to get to 1,000 being a one and done carrier, right? So as quickly as possible, you want to do that. Your sales organization should be built with this in mind, and sometimes it means very lean days in the early years, but that's where that long-term focus, if your focus is 1,000 truck fleet, you got to be thinking the long-term the entire way, and sacrificing profits and revenue and whatever you can sacrifice in the early years to get to that point.
Gotcha. So when you look at, obviously, I don't think anybody really gets into the trucking business to form a trucking company that their goal is to have 1,000 trucks. Obviously, their goal is more, financial, or you're looking for different milestones along those lines. But having said that, along the way, there are going to be opportunities there as well. And I think one of the really interesting things that we're starting to see now, especially in this market, is the M&A space. And, when you start to move up, all of a sudden, maybe you have an opportunity to make an acquisition or merge, and all of a sudden you've grown. And depending on how things work out, from the top down, maybe you maintain the top job at that particular thing. When you look at M&A's opportunities, as ways of growth. Obviously, there's a lot of time that has to happen between the start of one and the end of one. But what do you look at that in terms of, hey, obviously Knight Swift and U.S. Express, that's an incredible deal there for Knight Swift. And I think many people in trucking would say that was a great deal for them as well. When you look at that space, what do you see?
And it's very good that we're coming up with financials here. So before I answer that, let's talk about finances. Getting your finances in order to where you can go out and do M&A deals, right? Because those are complicated. Mergers and acquisitions, especially in trucking, you have to have the financing already secured in a lot of ways. You have to have the cash flow. You have to build on that. And that goes back to sacrificing, right? Not taking things out of the business and reinvesting. Always be reinvesting in that business. So if we look at M&A, the Knight Swift deal is always going to be heralded as an awesome deal, right? It was a 50-50 shot. That was an awesome deal. It could have been a disaster, right? Just as easily could have been a disaster. And that's what you see with M&A deals. And I think the research pans out. Most M&A deals, the vast majority, don't work out. So be very careful, especially if you don't have any experience in doing deals. They can be murderous. You can overpay. You can pay for things that you didn't really expect to get. You could buy something with an organization, right, that has a dramatically different culture than yours, and it could be poisonous. So when you go down the M&A road, it is important to have very trusted advisors, right? M&A advisors who've done this, who know what they're doing, to be able to give you, good advice, help you out, especially if you're foreign, if you haven't done any M&A deals in the past. It is a very difficult thing to do, especially in trucking. So proceed with caution.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we've done this a little bit out of order, but let's go back and look at financials in terms of what are your main considerations and concerns, actually, I should say, in terms of making sure that you stay afloat financially and that you're not misusing your money as you try and make these growth spurts to get to whatever goal it is, be it 1,000 trucks or a certain, say, for instance, a certain number in terms of revenue.
Credit. Make sure that you're on top of your credit situation, your tax situation as well, because taxes are complicated. Make sure that you're buying efficiently, whether that's new trucks coming out of fleet, diesel fuel, right? Making sure that everything is efficient as possible in your financing, but develop those relationships with banks, with creditors, with all options that you have on the table. And that's another reason why you need a sales manager, right? Because you need to be out talking to banks, talking to creditors, talking to equity investors. You have to figure out, are you going to raise capital? How are you going to raise capital? Is it going to be equity, debt? What's the tax advantages of those? And this is things that are very complicated and time consuming, but you have to be a master of that. And once you gain the experience doing that, then you're going to be more comfortable as you move along, and you're going to be more comfortable doing deals later in the cycle, right? Because you have all of these considerations already done, and hopefully you've hired somebody who comes from the deal-making space to be able to guide you through that, who's on your payroll, who you trust and makes good decisions as well, and not to overlook those soft, we can get lost in the numbers sometimes, those soft cultural, question marks, because that's where synergies come in. And that's oftentimes when deals go to die. But when we're talking about finances, you got to act like you from the get-go, right? Everything from the get-go. From the get-go, you have to act like you have to operate like you have 1,000 trucks. Even if you only have 10 or 20 or 50, you have to act and make those decisions based on, what if I had 1,000 trucks? What would I do?
That's a great point there to make as well. Let me ask you this: just a couple of questions left, because we've got we're running out of time here. But maybe if you look at this process, and obviously I don't think I certainly don't know anyone who has taken, a trucking company from 1 to 1,000. But of those that have made major inroads towards that goal or have gone past that and on to bigger and better things, is there perhaps one mistake that you might see people make that is their, not necessarily their downfall, but maybe the thing that you've just, like the pothole you got to look out for if you're trying to grow a trucking business? And granted, let's just take the economy out of it, because obviously a lot of trucking companies are going to be hitting the wayside here in the downturn that we have right now. But maybe one mishap or pothole that you think you've just got to avoid if you're going to make it.
It's getting outside your niche, outside your specialization, right? Trying to be all things to all people, chasing bad deals, trying to expand where it doesn't make sense. Because I think it's a big ramp up to 1,000 trucks, and you have to have scale, and it's easy to go out and just look for any incremental revenue or clients or capabilities that you can get your hands on. But if it doesn't make sense in the central thesis of what you do really well, you are going to burn a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources, and destroy your culture and your specialization by doing that. I think that's the biggest pitfall for any company, and it holds true for trucking as well.
Yeah, you got to stay in your lane. No pun intended there as well. Yeah. When you look at this, let's take our last two here. One thing maybe that you might be bullish about and bearish about when it comes to growing trucking companies, in terms of tactics used to try and get to a quote unquote 1,000 truck threshold.
I'm bullish on technology. I think there's enough technology solutions and more coming down the pipe that is going to help you out both quantitatively or analytically in how you should be pricing your services, what business to go after, how to operate more efficiently, how to automate more and more. And I think it's easier for a company in that respect to get to 1,000 trucks, right? Because you don't have the added expense and resources that you need to pour into building this from the ground up. A lot of great off-the-shelf tools for everything from customer management to truck management, dispatching, TMS. It's all out there that you can lightly customize and upgrade without as much headache as in the past. There's still a lot of headache whenever you upgrade technology, but it's not quite as dramatically bad and risky as it was 5-10 years ago. So that's great. Challenges, I think, is the rising inflationary costs that is going to be attributed to it, and also the changing landscape, right? Because we're talking about electric vehicles, we are talking about autonomous. When does that take hold? Who really knows? But the game is going to change, and then on the fleet side, and being on top of that, and being able to identify those trends, and because in a decade, 1,000 trucks, who knows if you're using diesel anymore? Who knows what the landscape's going to be, and also your manufacturing pace as well, right? Are those still going to be predominantly in Southeast Asia, or is there still going to be some reshoring, some nearshoring? Being able to adapt to those changing trends in logistics is going to be a challenge, but if you crack that code and you rise to that challenge, that's where the profits are.
Nice. I'm going to ask you one more question because I just thought of it. And if this is not a good question, I'm just going to throw it out here anyway. So let's say someone is interested in taking on a deal like this, and they're maybe not necessarily going for 1,000 trucks, just want to build a really big, well-run trucking company. What would you say is required reading for them to do, whether it's a freight-centric book, a truck-centric book, or even just a business-centric book? What is required reading if you're going to do this and do it successfully?
I think one of the my favorite books, there's a couple, but I'll do the Simon Sinek Start with Why. Because if you want to do 100 trucks or 200 trucks or 1,000 trucks, you're going to have a team of people. and they're all going to have to buy into this culture that we're talking about, right? And it all does really start with why. Why should it matter to them? Why should it matter to your customers? Why should it matter? And if you start with the why, you start your storytelling, your sales, all, to your drivers, to your employees, to your management team, to your customers, to your vendors, with why, you'll get further. I think that should be required reading for everybody in business these days.
That's a great selection. All right, Kevin, it is time now. You have the podium. You have the ear of everybody in the freight universe, in the auditorium. Where would you like to see the freight conversation go from here?
I've become fascinated a little bit with the final mile, right? It's a piece that I'm trying to wrap my head around, because you have the final mile, or first mile, final mile. But then you have something on top of that I think is something that is very lucrative, or it could be very lucrative in the coming years, and that's reverse logistics. And that is all the returns going back on a daily basis, and how to get your arms around that. I think that's fascinating. I don't know exactly where that industry is, or that skill set is right now. But I really want to learn more about that. And it'd be great if the next guest could teach me what I don't know.
That is, I've heard a little bit more and more about that recently than in the past. But yeah, reverse logistics, certainly a fascinating topic there to tackle, and I'm sure our next guest will hopefully aptly answer that as well. Kevin Hill, managing partner of OTR Advisors, thanks so much for joining us and being a part of our freight conversation.
Thank you, Bill. Always a pleasure talking to you.